All right. Welcome everybody. My name is Blake Ananoff with the Illinois Environmental Council. Today we're going to be doing a joint webinar with Freddie from Chicago Votes on the RACE Act. And she's going to go through a PowerPoint presentation on what the RACE Act is and let you guys know how you can get involved if you're not already. So there's only a handful of us today. So if you guys want to go ahead and put in the chat your names, pronouns, organizations, and if this is your first interaction with our organizations, go ahead and put that as well. But yeah, I'll kick it off to Freddie.
Hello, thank you so much, you all, for being here. Want to personally thank the Illinois Environmental Council and Blake for working with us to get this together and to talk about the connection between voting rights and the environment. Blake put together an excellent blog that I hope you all checked out. But yeah, that's all I have. Should I get started with the slides now or pass back to you?
Sure, yeah, you can get started with the slides and then we can do like a Q&A afterwards for folks that have questions.
Sounds good. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So today we're going to talk about strengthening democracy by empowering communities experiencing incarceration through legislation like the RACE Act. So we'll just get into it. So we always like to start with a few different things. The first one is just highlighting the need to strengthen our democracy. We know that incarceration is the most common cause of disenfranchisement in the United States, and that people in prison are the last remaining group of disenfranchised people in Illinois. And that voter disenfranchisement and silencing people in prison allows for further injustices to be enacted. And when people in prison can't vote, well, we'll talk more about this a little bit later, they can't influence policy, hold elected officials accountable, go against and fight things like inhumane prison conditions, problematic judges, and tough on crime policies persist more easily. So those are just to name a few reasons why it's important that we look at felony disenfranchisement as something that needs to end and something that we need to organize around. So one thing that we really care about in the Unlock Civics Coalition is using the language that we use and knowing that our words matter. So for the purpose of this presentation and inside of our Unlock Civics Coalition, we don't use words like inmate, convict, felon, juvenile delinquent, offender, ex-con. We prefer to use words like directly impacted person or individual, formerly incarcerated person, or formerly incarcerated person, person experiencing incarceration, or currently incarcerated person. And we'll use different words like this interchangeably. But the reason that we do this is because primarily we want to focus on the humanity of each person. And sometimes language can be used to stereotype or marginalize people rather than support them while they rebuild their lives. And so we don't think that people should be defined by their conviction history, and we just want to be cognizant of the words that we use. So just highlighting some of the ideology for ending felony disenfranchisement, some of the main things that we like to talk about with constituents, things that people bring up, and with lawmakers. We talked about the need to strengthen democracy, making sure that no one is locked out of the opportunity to participate, and that we believe that voting is a right, not a privilege. There's a racial impact. We know in Illinois that Black people make up about 14% of the state's population, but only will make up 55% of the Illinois Department of Corrections population. So we have a huge disproportionate number of people who are incarcerated that are people of color and Black people specifically. And so when we look at the history of felony disenfranchisement, these are laws that popped up after Black people started getting rights, after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And you'll see a lot of different states amending their state constitutions to allow felony or the felony status to take away your right to vote. And so these are in direct correlation with Black people getting the right to vote through federal laws. Also, another thing that we talk about is inhumane prison conditions. And in the current system, ending abusive practices and inhumane treatment requires years of expensive litigation if they're even ever addressed. So we know that giving people who are incarcerated political power could give them leverage to be able to counteract and work against some of the inhumane systems or conditions inside of prisons. Then another thing that we talk about a lot, and one of the main things, is rehabilitation and community. We know that felony disenfranchisement has no deterrent or rehabilitative value. It actually contributes to higher rates of recidivism. One thing we talk about a lot is community cohesion. And people who are part of a community, feel like they're part of a community, are less likely to harm their community. And we also have research that shows that people who are engaged in their community civically and other ways are less likely to reoffend and less likely to go to prison. And another stat that we talk about a lot is most people who are incarcerated will go back to their communities. Most people aren't serving life sentences. And so they should be able to vote and have a say in what goes on in their communities while they're physically removed from it. They have family members, they have friends, and all sorts of community back where they were before incarceration. So just to highlight Illinois specifically, and one of those bullet points that we talked about was inhumane prison conditions. Inside of different correctional centers in Illinois, the conditions have been deplorable. So we pulled some articles just talking about the need to repair inside of these prisons. So we know that Stateville Prison just closed due to a lot of issues that were going on, like mold, Legionella, vermin, and a lot of other things. So this article that came out said that Illinois prisons need about $2.5 billion in repairs, and that's just the beginning. And so when we look at issues like felony disenfranchisement, these conditions are allowed to persist more easily because the people inside don't have representation and political power to talk to their elected officials and make sure that these conditions don't persist. Another thing that we talk about a lot is that people in prison want to vote. A lot of times when we'll talk to lawmakers or even community members who aren't familiar with, oops, let me go back here. There we go. With how people inside are actually very much engaged and educated and know what's going on outside in the community. They have access to the news and through their family members and community members. And so that should not be something that is a reason that we don't give people the right to vote inside. And so we have some excerpts here of letters of people from folks who are inside of the Department of Corrections that have sent to us some of the reasons why they want to vote. So I'll just quickly read the bottom letter. It says prisoners should have voting rights that could help our wives, children, grandparents, and siblings who they love in the city. Their concerns are our concerns, whether it's taxes, childcare, home care, development in our community, schools, and more. Most individuals will go back to the community from which they came, and it is well overdue to give people in prison the right to vote. Just another highlighting that they are still members of community and have concerns. They pay taxes. And the first letter kind of highlights how it increases public safety because it invites them to co-participate with the people in our society to fulfill their civic duty and be socially responsible. So just wanted to highlight that. One thing that we talk about a lot is that the constitutionality of this. There's been some discourse around whether or not Illinois Constitution permits this, and it does. So just wanted to give y'all a quick refresher for folks who have heard this before and for folks who are not familiar. Our Illinois Constitution says a person convicted of a felony or otherwise under sentence in a correctional institution or jail shall lose the right to vote, which shall be restored not later than upon completion of their sentence. Not later than, put the definition up here means that it can happen at, in, on, or before. So not later than completion of their sentence means that it could be restored earlier than that. So this is a conversation that sometimes comes up with lawmakers. So I wanted to share that with the community in case that's something that you've heard as well. So how did we get to the Race Act, which is the legislation that we're here to talk about today, and to give folks more information about. But a precursor to that is the Re-entering Citizens and Civics Education Act, which was legislation that was passed in 2019, that required IDOC and Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice to offer peer-led workshops on voting rights. And it was written by incarcerated individuals with advocates, and it's the first law of its kind in the US. So basically, to outline what that really means and what that looks like is inside of these courses, it's peer taught. So other guys who are not just guys, women as well, people who are inside teach these courses to their peers that basically outline suffrage history, voting rights history, how to complete a voter registration card, what it means to be civically engaged, and how to interact with issues in your community that you care about. So at this time, there are 412 trained peer civic educators in the Department of Corrections, and there's been over 5,000 peer taught civics course participants in IDOC at this time. And here's a quote that was pulled from a peer educator from Graham Prison. People often come away from the experience with the idea that politics is about them. To be a part of something, we have to feel like we belong. So the Reintegration and Civic Empowerment Act, I think I put these slides out of order here. So I'll explain this slide with the last slide. So in 2019, that's when the Reentering Citizens and Civic Education Act, requiring those courses that we just talked about in the last slide, J.B. Pritzker signed that into law in 2019. So in 2021, the Unlocked Civics Coalition is formed, and mostly around voting in prison legislation. And so this Unlocked Civics Coalition is, there's a ton of members from the coalition on this call right now, basically organizations dedicated to ending felony disenfranchisement in Illinois. In 2023, we looked at our campaign and realized that we needed to strengthen it and to add civics education component to the bill. So we created the Race Act, which combines civic education and voting rights for people in prison. So it builds upon this 2019 law that required these courses in IDOC. And originally, when this bill was passed, it required folks to take it when they were about to be released, because the idea is they're getting their voting rights back. Because once you're not incarcerated, you're able to vote again in the state of Illinois. So the idea in this bill is we move it from not just being available to people who are getting out, but making it available to everyone, and then adding voting rights restoration language inside of the legislation. So that's what the Race Act is, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Fast forward to 2025, which is now, we are working with the Race Act as SB 1733. So that is our bill number right now. So again, just to highlight the two components of the Reintegration and Civic Empowerment Act, which is SB 1733, we moved the peer talk civics courses to the beginning of incarceration instead of the final year, ensuring that all individuals get this knowledge early, with the idea that they will get their voting rights restored within 14 days of conviction to allow them to participate in the democracy. So those are the two main components of the Reintegration and Civic Empowerment. There's a lot there, but I'm gonna pause for questions. But I also, before we get into discussion and talk a little bit more, I wanted to invite you all to join us in Springfield on May 7th. We're gonna have a day of advocacy where we will meet with legislators, share stories, and advocate for voting rights. If you're located in the Chicagoland area and need transportation, we'll have a bus taking folks down to Springfield on that day and bringing them back. All meals will be provided. And yeah, it's just a great time. Even if it's your first time in Springfield, we'll pair you with somebody who will be your team leader, who will just kind of walk you through the day Make sure that you feel comfortable talking to legislators. And we'll do a training beforehand so everyone has what they need to do that. So I will stop there and pass it back to Blake, or just open it up for any questions or comments that people may have.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Freddie. Does anybody have questions for Freddie? We don't have that many people on, so you can go ahead and just come off mute if you have a question, or you can throw it in the chat if you're not comfortable with that. Stevie has his hand raised. Unless he doesn't have a question. You can also have Freddie drop her email in case folks think of questions later.
Oh, Steve says he can't come off mute.
Let me see that.
Oh, folks aren't able to come off for audio, and maybe due to the
Okay.
webinar format. Okay,
I
there we go.
just, yeah, I just added everybody.
Mic check. Hey, everyone. Stevie Valles here. I'm with Chicago Votes with Freddie. I just shout out to Freddie. Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to add a little bit of extra information about where we're at right now in the legislature as it relates to passing this law. So right now we have enough support in the House and Senate. We feel confident that there's enough votes to pass the law out of both chambers. The governor is committed to signing it into law. The Speaker of the House is supportive of it. The hangup is mainly the Illinois Senate president's legal staff. And so we're really hoping that we can push them to call the bill in the Senate. Right now, it looks like there's an elections omnibus that is trying to be moved through the legislature. So we want to either get it included in that or through another avenue in order to pass the legislation. This year is really important too because it's not an election year. Every time there's an election year, the legislators have a tendency to not want to vote on anything. So we're really hoping that we can push them to move this bill before June. And so that's this May Advocacy Day is going to be a big day for us. It's going to be one of the final big pushes where we'll be bringing in a lot of external support as a community down to advocate for this law. And so, yeah, and there's a ton of other ways to get involved too. But just wanted to add those 2 cents. And again, thank you, Freddie. Great presentation. And thank you, everybody who joined.
What's the number, the bill number?
1733.
House bill?
Senate bill.
Okay.
I will also quickly drop in the chat a link to our action network, where folks can find a link to send an email to their lawmaker. And it's already pre-filled out. All you have to do is put in your name and your address so they can figure out who your lawmaker is. And you can feel free to tweak the letter as much as you want. But there is one that's already drafted and it'll send it straight to your lawmaker. So I will drop that in the chat. Do we have any other questions at this time?
How does it work with where the Constitution says that you lose your voting rights? Do you have to then, once you're incarcerated, somebody has to sign off for you to regain them while you're incarcerated?
Yes, that's a great question. So it is required in our state constitution that you have to lose the right to vote. So there does have to be some period of disenfranchisement, but it doesn't say how long that period has to be. And so how it's been interpreted is, or applied, so to speak, is that you lose your right to vote from the time you are incarcerated to the time you get out. But the Constitution has language that restores earlier restoration. And so that is what we're trying to work with. Within our language, there is a 14-day disenfranchisement period in order for us to be in compliance with the Constitution. But yeah, so we hope that this, when it passes, it'll shorten that period to allow more people to vote. So I hope, does that answer your question?
Sorta, yeah, I mean, yeah. I just, if the bill doesn't say who gets to re-enfranchise you or sign off, like after the 14-day period, is it the prison officials? Is it the, probationary officials? I mean, how does a person get re-enfranchised after 14 days? Does the bill actually spell that out, or is that something that they send to some governor's office to do, some agency?
Yes, I will do my best to answer, but I also know we have other people on the call that may be able to share more context. So feel free to jump on and interrupt me and add more context at any time. But my understanding is the State Board of Election and the Department of Corrections are in communication with each other, and they send every so often, they'll send a list of everyone that they have, and they'll work with the Illinois Board of Elections to take them off the voter rolls. So after, when they would get their voting rights back, it's my understanding that they would have to re-register to vote, to be added back to the voter rolls. And anyone, please correct me if or add any context if that's helpful. Does that answer your question, Nancy?
I think I'm a lawyer, so I guess I'll just have to read the act once it's passed to get my question answered. I'm not sure you're understanding my question.
Okay.
I have a question. The voting rights restoration, is it contingent on the type of crime that the incarcerated individual committed?
Yes. So actually, no, to answer your question, there's no speculation on like what kind of crimes would allow for voter restoration and wouldn't. It's just a blanket for everybody.
Oh, okay.
And Ami, I see you have your hand up. So if you are down.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Freddie and Blake, for the amazing presentation. I agree with what Freddie mentioned as far as the registration piece. And I wanted to mention that under the current law, without the Race Act being passed yet, under the current law, eligibility is restored once people leave incarceration, and that eligibility restoration is considered automatic. Now, people still have to go out there and register, so they're not automatically back on the voter rolls, but the eligibility restoration is automatic under current law, and the Race Act would kind of follow the same path of making the eligibility restoration automatic after 2 weeks, but someone still having to register. So it would be an imperfect system, but imperfect in the same way that it is right now under Illinois law. And again, appreciate how Freddie answered the question. Totally agree with Freddie, and just wanted to break it down a little bit more.
And I'll add, and one of the things we're hoping with the expansion of civic courses in prison as well is that part of those courses can include the voter registration process. So once somebody is detained, They are removed from the voting rolls by data sharing between the State Board of Elections and the Illinois Department of Corrections. After 2 weeks, they'll be made re-eligible, and then we would have to do the work to register them to add them back onto the voting rolls, the same way anybody is added onto the voting rolls. Right now, the intention is to do vote by mail when it comes time for elections to allow people to vote. So that voter registration piece of it is going to be really important as part of the civic education courses. And part of those civic education courses would include, upon the passage of this law, notifying people inside that they are now eligible post the 2 week period. And that 2 week period also aligns with the intake process for when someone is incarcerated to what the facility they're actually going to be incarcerated at. So to Ami's point, is an imperfect system. It's not what we want to do. In an ideal world, people wouldn't lose their right to vote at all. But in order to comply with the plain language of the Constitution, this is the system that we have to set in place.
Thanks, Stevie. Thanks, Ami. Does anyone else have any questions? Not, we can go ahead and wrap early. I think Freddie put her email in the chat, so if anybody thinks of questions later or wants to get involved, feel free to shoot her or I an email. But thanks you to everybody that showed up. I really appreciate it. Freddie or Stevie, do you have anything else to add?
I will just add just a big thank you to you and the whole team at the Illinois Environmental Council. You guys have been excellent partners and really appreciate and enjoy every time we get to work with you all. And want to thank everybody for joining and all of our partners who signed up to learn more about this. And I will follow up with, when you signed up, I think everyone gave their email, so I can just also follow up with an email just to make sure that everyone has the link to communicating with lawmakers, a link to the petition, and just link to more information about the campaign if you want to continue to get involved or share information with your folks and community. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie.
That's all.